So we wanted to take a minute to introduce ourselves. My name is Katie. I'm a senior design principal at Ed Elements, a teacher who cared about me a lot when I still remember as my second grade teacher, Miss Maryell. She knew a lot about my family and took all opportunities to kind of ask me about both of my sisters, even though she hadn't taught them. And so on some level, I felt very accountable to her. She knew my mom, she knew my sisters. But I felt like that was the first time that a teacher had recognized who I was outside of the classroom. So really resonated. All of the things that you all share really stuck with me as well. Maryell, how about you?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a couple teachers, but one teacher that really comes to mind is my 7th grade science teacher, Mrs. Wallace. She just seemed to care so much, and she showed us by really including us and also creating a lot of like celebrations, a lot of like traditions in our classroom. And she ended up being a mentor that I had through a scholarship program. So I got to like see the world in a couple different ways with her. And she was just so nurturing. I remember when she spoke, I wanted to look like her. And I was like, oh, why doesn't my neck do this? Like, she was just I loved her in all the ways. And she just, even though she didn't speak Spanish, she tried with my family. She really engaged, and my parents still love her and ask about her now.
Thanks, Maryell, for checking in. We are really excited to be with you here today. Today's meant to be a conversation where Maryell and I will share a little bit, as we just did, about ourselves, about our experiences and what we've seen be successful, but we're hopeful that this is a conversation among the full group. So we'll ask you to engage kind of throughout today as we share our own stories and experiences as well. So how this webinar series was born, as we thought about redesigning our principles to approach personalizing learning, we kind of landed on these 4 things. So student-centered design, nurturing learning environments, having an equity focus, and making sure we're staying data informed. And we're having webinars on each one of these topics. Maryell and I are really excited to talk about how nurturing learning environments impacts the way that we personalize learning for students. So again, I mentioned this, but today is really meant to share a variety of perspectives, not just our own, but also to hear from you, to promote some collaboration and community here, and to discuss alignment with personalizing learning. What does that look like? So if you are not familiar with our approach to personalizing learning, this is kind of the infographic that encompasses all of the pieces. We have the core 4 elements that surround it, and these are our classroom practices. So reflection, goal setting, targeted instruction, flexible path and pace, and collaboration and creativity. These are the things and the components that we truly believe make personalizing come alive for kids, with the goal at the center is creating more ownership for students. So we know that each one of these pieces can create ownership in different ways. And they're not silos. I know they're siloed here, but they do work together and come out in different ways. So they're not separate. They work together to create more ownership for kids. And then an adjustment that we made. So our company has, been engaged in personalized learning for about 10 years. And we stepped back over the last year to think about what was missing from our approach. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So this nurturing learning environments component is really about how can we create the space for kids to feel like they are cared for, seen, and heard by all of their educators in order to personalize their learning better. So that's kind of how we approach personalized learning, with the goal of student ownership, but understanding that nurturing learning environments is a really integral part of that as well. So for this piece, I was going to give the mic to Maryell to talk about, again, I said this, the goal of student ownership and nurturing learning environments. They are aligned to the CASEL components of self-awareness, social awareness, and strong relationships. Maryell, you got it.
Absolutely. And I got to see some of that in the chat, how a couple of you were noting how you really own that learning, whether it was in the classroom or being a wrestling team scorekeeper. So those are the types of things that we want students to feel like they can own their learning and they are leaders in their classroom. And if you're wondering, nurturing learning environment, where did this term come from? The way that we're really thinking about it is developing these nurturing learning environments create the conditions to personalize learning for all students. These nurturing learning environments include these foundational elements. So social awareness, being as a teacher, being aware of what's going on, but also having students really start becoming aware of others, of their needs, of empathizing, self-awareness, and this is for teachers and students, really starting to become aware of oneself. For students, this can really be helpful in terms of emotional regulation. And even for adults, it can be helpful, as well as strong relationships. So often, when I was an instructional coach, I noticed that some of the most high performing classrooms were also ones where students felt really cared for, really seen. So really thinking of and highlighting those strong relationships that teachers create as part of this nurturing learning environment. And so Katie, as someone who has been working in personalized learning world for a couple years and who got to facilitate what we're calling the original core four, and who is now guiding teachers, school districts through this newer version of the core four, how did we get here? How can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, thanks, Maryell. So I would love to share a little bit about how we ended up here. It's kind of in three different layers. There's both, academic research around this. There's some anecdotal research that we have. And then there's just kind of this experience that we hope to shift for students. So in the research part, everything that we were reading felt like um, social emotional well-being for kids was a priority, and it was everywhere. There's a lot of research that shows, and Maryell, you mentioned this, of like our highest performing classrooms are usually where our students feel cared for, seen, understood. And there's a lot of research around student development and brain development around self-awareness, social awareness, and how that can impact your academic success. And so for me, it was important to have that research, but really as a person, I believe that students are more important than content. And so for me, this was just a really important shift that we were making. Something that we heard, as we support many districts with personalized learning, and the thing I heard most often as we started working with school districts again in person this year was, wow, over the last year, there has been so much isolation for kids and for students. Even for me, I'm like, all right, how do I socialize with people again as we head out into the world? And so they were like, this is the most important thing that we need to be thinking about as students come back into a shared space, into a building. There's kindergartners who have never been in school before. In the same place, there are 10th graders who are really like 8th graders in middle school who have never been in the high school building. So all of these pieces felt like they were the most important thing that teachers were thinking about. And I had the opportunity as well to talk about student experience, to hear from student focus groups around what do you want, what makes school matter for you. And so many of the things that were shared were not related to academic content at all. They were about relationships with their friends and their peers. They were about, we added in the chat, like being asked to do extracurricular activities, being a leader in some way outside of the classroom, and relationships with their teachers and some leaders of their schools. And very rarely it was someone like, yeah, I just love digging into this content. It was usually about the relationships, kind of those experiences that students could have. And so when we first started doing this work, personalized learning felt like it was something separate from social emotional learning, which I know that they are two different things, but we didn't want them to feel like if I was doing personalized learning, then we couldn't be doing social emotional learning, because we believe that this practice of creating a nurturing learning environment is really important to making students feel like they are in a space where they can learn first. So those are kind of things. that we were thinking about, both research-wise, personal experience, personal preference, to be honest, and just the anecdotal hearing from students and teachers why we made this shift.
Katie, that's really powerful. And it sounds like there's this deep sense of wanting kids to feel known. Could you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get to Ed Elements and what do you do here? For
Yeah,
those
so
who
it's a great question. So I started as a fifth grade math and science teacher. I'm actually from New Jersey, but taught in Oklahoma. And I would have stayed a teacher for my entire life. The reason I left teaching is I was like, I really want to make a greater impact for kids. I left teaching to work in policy. And I was like, whew, I went from being with kids every day to feeling so far removed, all the way up here. And I saw that you can make a big impact from here, but for me, it's really about working with people who impact kids every day. So I left the classroom to make a greater impact, really missed the classroom and being in schools. And so that's why I love the role we're in now, working with leaders, working with students, kind of getting to hear what school is like from kids, to impact the way that we adjust their instruction. So that's kind of what I am passionate about, how I ended up in this role, why I care about personalized learning, and this addition of nurturing learning environments.
awesome,
Maryell,
Katie. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say for you, as you think about how we got here, what excites you about the changes that we've made?
I think that this really speaks to my teacher heart. So, a little bit about my background. I am the daughter of immigrants. My parents came to the US in their 20s, and I was born. and we, they really have, they really sacrificed. They worked incredibly hard. And I felt really indebted. I wanted to really make them proud. And teachers for me were the people where I felt incredibly safe, where I felt seen, and it felt like my teachers really cared. Even what and as a English language learner, I remember going from second grade where I was still like working in Spanish and then doing full immersion in third grade, and just like my teacher really like saying like you've got this, and having a little group of other students who are doing that. So I think teachers have always been people who made me feel like I mattered. And I got to go to college on a scholarship. And then I wanted to be a teacher when I graduated. So I became a teacher, and a second grade bilingual teacher in Houston, Texas. And this type of work really resonates with me because as a teacher, I wanted to achieve as much as possible, get to know all the things, but I think I really reflected on how important it was for me to be present, to be calm, to be loving, and how that made a big difference, especially for some of my students who had some pretty chaotic life environments where they could come to school and have that sense of feeling seen like I did. And so I wanted to cultivate that for them. But I remember at the time it felt a little counterculture. I was in a very, and it may still feel like very data driven environments where it's all about scores. And I was like and my primary focus was trying to help my students feel safe and feel like learning was fun. And I really wanted them to feel, especially that reading was something that they were going to fall in love with. And so it aligned with scores, but I think that this idea of helping students be equipped for the world, whether it meant reading, but also maybe getting to know themselves, getting to regulate their emotions, just really resonates with me. So I'm really excited that part of the core 4 is this more tangible sense of teachers and students becoming self-aware and really bringing that social emotional learning into classrooms.
Yeah, thanks, Maryell. Something that you shared of like this data-driven culture that we live in. Yes, data is important, but also it's important to create a space where students feel seen, heard, and cared for. And something else you shared resonated with me as we were doing research on what we needed to change. If you look at all of the like top 10 skills students need as they enter the world, workforce, college, wherever students choose to go, problem solving, ability to collaborate with others, kind of like this this idea of being able to like think about the way that you exist in the world always come up on the top 10 list. So that really stuck with me as you were sharing.
Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, we wanted to kind of hear from you all in the chat. We wish that this could be a face-to-face conversation or we could see your faces, but why is this creating this space of a nurturing learning environment important to your school, your classroom, and or your community? What's resonating with you? We shared a little bit about how we got here, why it's important, but let's hear from you all. Why is this important for you? Yeah, Erin, I love the call out that without strong relationships, it's hard to teach. Makes me think about that Rita Pearson TED Talk where she's like, kids don't learn from people they don't like, but really kids don't learn from people who don't care about them. So I think those those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, and Chrissy, that what you're saying about kids not having that nurturing learning environment in their home lives is something that I thought a lot about. I worked with second graders for a few years, and I had the chance to help start a college access program. So I went from second graders to 9th through 12th graders, which is a really big shift. But something I noticed there too is that for some kids, school was the place, whether it was during school hours or after school programs, that was a place where they could feel just like safe and also just feel like someone cared, someone noticed them. And even as a coach, I would see some kids who would come after school and be like, hey, miss, do you need any help? And sometimes there wasn't anything for them to help with, but the teacher would create that. And I would have coaching conversations with the kid there, and they felt included, and they felt like this was the place where they wanted to be. And it just felt really wonderful that teachers just had them there and that they felt like they could be of service. And Karen, we often don't know the challenges kids face outside of school, which definitely resonates with me.
Yeah, David, something that you added too, when students feel safe, they become more engaged. I feel like even as adults, right? Like if I'm uncomfortable in a space, I probably won't be speaking. And I think the same goes for our kids. So a lot of the times what we hear from, I think, schools and districts that we work with is, oh, we really want to increase student engagement. And if you don't get to the root cause of why students are engaged, you're never going to fix that. So you're never going to change the practices. And I believe, just my personal belief, that a lot of that comes from the relationships and spaces that we create for kids.
Yeah, and Nary, about your students being ESL. I think it's great that you're creating an environment where kids can experiment with a new language, where they can do all these different things. And that speaks to what Katie was talking about too.
Yeah, John, thanks for sharing that and modeling some vulnerability here. That's really powerful, I think, both in the way that you shared and modeled that you can, you're something that you didn't realize about yourself until you were older. And things moved quickly in the classroom. I feel like a lot of my students had that same experience, especially I moved from New Jersey to Oklahoma, and everyone was like, you are moving way too fast. So even just small things like that were were helpful for me to recognize different learning styles.
Yeah. And I feel like for me, that also resonates because as an adult, I realized I'm like neurodiverse. And that was really interesting to be like, oh, okay, my brain just works in a different way. It's really good at some things and it really struggles with others. And it sounds like for you being in that classroom, being able to collaborate, it's one of those, I got to see this as a coach, as a teacher, where sometimes kids were talking, but they were explaining things to each other. And it was interesting to then be able to as a teacher, create different rules versus instead of don't talk to each other. And it was like, oh, we need to add think, pair, share time so that if kids are confused, this is also giving me an instruction. And that also speaks to the kind of self-awareness work that could be really helpful for adults, where as adults, I remember being a teacher, a newer teacher, and just doing things that were a little bit different because I was like, oh, I love it when my kids take authority. But for other people, that felt frustrating. And so being able to just really see like, oh, kids are talking right now because they're trying to understand versus like the kids are talking, they're not listening to me is a very different thing that these kind of SEL practices can help with.
Thanks, Maria.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was going to say the last thing that I loved, Heather pointed this out. I think sometimes when we talk about nurturing learning environments, we're like, oh, well, we really want to provide this space for kids who maybe don't have the space otherwise. But I love the call out of like, even if students have great relationships at home, if they have a whole network of support, it's still important that they continue to build that. So this isn't just for some kids who like really need it or don't have it otherwise, but it's helpful for everyone. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that call out.
And along with that, I feel like that's where, as a teacher, I would be like, this is squad goals. Like everyone here is like on the same page. And it was just so awesome to be able to support parents in the ways that I could, where we were all like saying the same thing and where I got the benefit of some home cooked meals because parents are awesome. And whether it's that or like conversations, just being able to talk to those parents and just help kids feel like it's not just school and then their family, but that those things are connected, I think is really powerful.
So I know that we spent the beginning of today talking about how do we get here? Why is it important for us? You might be wondering, what does this look like in practice? So Maryell and I are excited to share a little bit about how we've approached this. And then we'll also share how we've seen others approach this work too. So again, this is meant to be a space where we'll share, but also want to hear from you continuously in the chat. You don't have to wait for us to prompt you. Maryell, you talked about this a little bit, but would love to hear how you made this come alive in your classroom or how you've seen other teachers execute this really beautifully.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about the practices. A lot of times as a coach, what I got to see was that there was the big pillar was strong behavior management, classroom management, but coming from the space of there was consistency. And it was just so fun for me to see the different personalities. You could have someone that was nurturing, that was more of a drill sergeant type, and where everyone, the way that they felt safe was that this person was incredibly consistent. They knew that maybe other environments were a little chaotic, but when they went there were things that went on. So that whether it was stations that went on, and I love seeing kids in one classroom, like just perform flawlessly, move around very well. And then in the same kids in a different classroom, we're just like, ah. So I think it really speaks to those relationships that teachers have with students, the types of ways that they invest students into whatever the classroom environment is. I've seen a lot of like, whether it's reward system or other types of just school-wide systems, like being able to have that connection with students makes a big difference, because then students are really able to not just perform their tasks, but really think through their tasks. And I know that student ownership is a really big part of Core 4. And I think this really connects to it because students are able to not just see this as like, I'm in this teacher's classroom, but oh, I am part of this classroom. I am also a pre-algebra student, or I'm also a 5th grade science student. What have you seen in your practice, Katie?
Yeah, so something that was important for me, I think, and you shared this as you talked through each component of social self-awareness and strong relationships, was to model what that looked like for my kids. And so something that I found to be really successful was I had a lot of kids who were scared to be bad at things. Like just like,
Yes,
I don't want
yes.
to fail publicly. This is embarrassing. I'm nervous, this kind of type of vibe. And so I'm like, oh, we have to change the dynamic of that space. And so for me, it was really about modeling vulnerability in learning new things. And so I did this thing where I would just share updates on something I was trying like totally new. One time it was like baking, and it was kind of like the opposite of nailed it. Of like I wasn't nailing it at all, but I would be sharing, all of the progress that I had made, even if it was really slow and pretty bad. And it was completely like outside of school, right? So I felt like this did a couple things. Like one, modeled not being good at something and being okay with it in public, and two, creating a space where I was being vulnerable with kids, and so they would feel comfortable saying like, "Hey, I tried this and it went really poorly." Eventually, what was cool was that I was able to grow into like students felt like they could share. It took a really long time for that to transition to like what I'm not good at in school, but they were really willing to be like, "I had this game and I did all of these things wrong." Pretty quickly. So I really tried to model these practices first, like self-awareness too, of just saying like, "Oh, I realized that I said this in this way and I didn't mean it," kind of owning some of those behaviors as well. So I started there as a teacher to try to just, embody the things that I hope my students would pick up on, and then moved into more of like a teaching how to, how to do that too. That makes sense.
Absolutely. As a teacher, I was very comfortable with kids correcting me. I remember mental math. Oh, there was one time that I was like showing how to do something, and my student Hector was like, "Miss Hernandez, that's wrong." And I was like, "Wow, Hector, you're paying attention. I love it. Look, everyone, Hector like noticed that this math problem was not correct. Thanks, Hector." Like, and those moments for them seemed to really help them see like, oh, Miss Hernandez is comfortable if I like share this. And it was so fun for me to also see how they like really own the classroom uh, through these different types of practices. And I love what you're saying in terms of just becoming more aware. I feel like what was really helpful in those moments was um, when I could see, oh, I'm bringing something from home. I'm pretty stressed out about this, and I had this reaction. And if I said something, I could then, or that maybe, or I was a little bit short with them, I could then tell them like, "Hey, everyone, right now, like, Miss Hernandez got pretty stressed out, and I know that everyone's trying their best. Can you forgive me for that? We're going to try to do better." And I think what I really appreciated is that it was the first time anyone had ever said something like that to them. And especially being second graders, they felt such agency being able to say like, "Okay," and just feeling like their opinions were thought about. And it did create a classroom where they felt they had all the opinions. And I love that. And that I was like very comfortable in that world. And in what you're saying of self-awareness, I remember when I was a few years into my education career, and I was like, I'm a great listener. I really love like connecting with people, and I wanted to know a little bit more about emotional intelligence. I picked up a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And I realized that while I was strong in like others, I like scored very little points in self-awareness. And it really prompted me to think, oh, what are the ways in which I kind of go around through the world, not really noticing like that I have emotions, or that kind of going and doing what I need to do, but without really thinking of how this is landing on me and impacting me. And I think in the last few years, I've really worked on it. And it's awesome to be able to say like, oh, this person's having a day, and not taking it as personally, and being able to just let that go, whether that's a student or that's an adult, and just being able to feel calmer and know that if people are saying something, it's again not personal, but it also feels like I have more leverage over my own emotions, because now I know that I have them. And I think I shared with you, Katie, that I think I grew up being like, I'm never mad, and it turns out that I was mad sometimes. And just being able to have even a conversation with myself around my emotions and being able to be okay with them, I think allows me to have compassion for others and then become aware of that. And even in my coaching conversations, uh, especially when I was one-on-one, being able to start with that, how are you doing? And really being able to connect with people in a way where it was like, we need to get work done, but you also matter to me. So how can I support you in this? And I think the more that I've invested in getting to know myself and getting to understand like how my history impacts me, the like more resilient I am and can then support others. So I think that's a really big piece of the CASEL work that's embedded in nurturing learning environments that I'm excited about for both teachers and students.
Yeah, I think something that I didn't plan for in this conversation that we're having, but I think has come out in every piece of this is um, for each one of these components, self-awareness, social awareness, and strong relationships, it's important that teachers do that work first, right? We can't really teach our students to be self-aware if we are not self-aware. It's hard to teach someone to have social awareness if you yourself haven't really thought deeply about what that looks like for you. Um, and so that's just something that I wanted to name here as we continue this work. It really is important for us to do that work too. So creating nurturing learning environments for kids requires a little bit of work ourselves too. So we wanted to hear from you. Maryell and I shared what we have done to build a nurturing learning environment. We have quite a few people on the line, again, wish we could hear your voice, but what have you seen or done to create a nurturing learning environment? We talked about modeling, we talked about consistency, we talked about learning about kids outside of the classroom, being advocates. What else have you all done or seen? Add to the chat.
And I would go to my students' performances or games. And I think that was really cool. So I'm curious to hear if anyone has done that too. Just been the awkward adult. Just like, yay, go you in the stands.
Yeah, I felt like when I first, when I was a teacher, I didn't have children. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to attend all of these sporting events. So it's like practice for being mom. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I got to go to some birthday parties too.
Yeah, Teresa said, even in my undergrad students, yeah, I was teaching higher ed.
Yeah, and my parents were always so busy working, and so being able to have someone in the stands was just so, and it still feels special to me. So I know that matters a lot to kids. Oh, I love this classroom traditions, Friday song, and other norms. Yeah, I really resonate with that. And I also had nicknames for my students as well.
Yeah, Chrissy, I read a book. This makes me think there's this book called Rituals for Work, but it's about how having rituals doesn't just have to be for your workplace. It is about like for adults, but just having rituals creates like such a more community experience. Rituals, traditions can really build a safe space. Aaron, I agree. Showing empathy with discipline. Maryell and I were talking about this the other day where we were like, so many times I've heard from kids of like, man, that teacher was tough, but he or she was fair. And like kids know when you're being fair and when you're not. And so I feel like that really resonates with me too.
Yeah, and oftentimes, not all the time, sometimes kids come in like in the middle of the year, but oftentimes kids have like grown up with each other. So they understand that some kids, what is fair for them can mean something different. And I think really calling that out and saying, like, each of us has something that we need, and this Angel is getting this. And for you, this is what it makes the most sense and can help you grow. So I think being able to share that out with them. I know that in my classroom, it made a difference because everyone had questions, everyone had thoughts. And I think just having that sense that every kid is different, because I think as a coach, I got to see how for some students, especially in the lower grades, there were like special tracking systems that were made for them that really worked. And I wondered how that could continue when they were in classrooms where there were a lot more students. So being able to have different discipline policies makes sense. And Mary, I love that your students introduce themselves each time you guys get a new student, and that you can discuss goal setting. And I love how you're giving them that ownership of how they can figure out how to make that goal happen for them.
Yeah, David, I agree. Also, some students who maybe aren't, your strongest students in your classroom right now, it's really great to get to see them excel on things outside of the classroom. It's a space, when you're good at something, it always feels good. So it's good to see students in that different space, and a grade taking an interest. They know when teachers really care. I will tell you, in every student focus group that I have been in the last, I've done a lot in the past, maybe like 3 months, especially in high school. I think the common strand is we'll say, there's some teachers here who really care, and there's some teachers here who don't care, and they like feel that. I would say 100% of the time that is a response that we get. And so that's not to say that some teachers don't care. It's just to say that sometimes students perceive you based on the environment that you've set up, or, whether or not you do some of these small micro moves that can make them feel seen and heard. The last thing or second to last thing that Maryell and I wanted to talk to y'all about was, so is this separate from the core four? We know that on this graphic on the left, we talk about the core four: reflection, goal setting, targeted instruction, collaboration, creativity, flexible path and pace. And then the nurturing learning environments hand kind of sits right under that. And so we wanted to talk about the connection between the core four and nurturing learning environments. So I do believe that, creating a nurturing learning environment is important. It is paramount to being able to personalize learning for kids, because you can't personalize instruction for kids that you don't know and care about. But that doesn't mean that they have to operate separately. I think that there's things that you can do within each one of these. Neri, you just talked about how you use goal setting as a way to build that nurturing space. And so there are ways within the core four to create a more nurturing learning environment. So there's a few things I'm just looking at the visual. I can give a few examples of what that might look like. I think the reflection piece is really important. Maryell, you talked about this, of being self-aware requires some level of personal and deep reflection. And so really that straight practice of letting students reflect and pause and think about how they feel, think about what they're bringing into a space, can be really powerful. For targeted instruction, this is really about small groups. And so something that I think we always or naturally do as teachers is group students by academic level or proficiency. One small thing that you can do is group students by something different, by interest, by something they care about, something you know about them, that is separate from how well they've done on a formative assessment. So there's different ways to group your students based on what they care about, based on what they are interested in, etc. For collaboration, creativity, I feel like this is really kind of intuitive, of giving space. To build social awareness, you need to have some social conversations in how you operate in the classroom or in the world, truly. For creativity, I think a lot about how you give space for students to choose what they work on. It's kind of aligned to project-based learning, but how can you choose an issue that you want to do a project on that impacts your community or impacts you personally? Creating that relevance for kids can be really powerful, of, oh, this is a space where what I care about outside of this room matters. And we can make connections pretty seamlessly here. And then lastly, flexible path and pace, I think, shows a level of trust. I trust that if I give you the autonomy to choose what works for you, that you'll be able to execute and do it really well. Or if I give you a window of time instead of giving you 2 minutes and 30 seconds to complete a task, I trust that you'll use your time well and in the way that you need it to complete this. So there's kind of different moves within each one of these buckets that I think can create a more nurturing learning environment for kids. Maryell, anything that you're thinking about as we make this connection between the core four and nurturing learning environments?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from you is that nurturing learning environments can live in each of these core four. And it's really the teacher actions, student moves that make these things come alive, right? Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I get, because as we were talking about this, I didn't want it to seem like it was something totally separate. Oh, you're asking me to personalize learning and you're asking me to do all of these things. But I think that there's, to your, yeah, exactly. There's ways within each one of the core four that you can create a nurturing learning environment for kids.
Yeah, and I think that that's really powerful too, in terms of bringing in some of these, like the social awareness, the self-awareness, the ability to really help students take on the skills that they'll need in the future. Because I think a lot of times when I think about reflection and goal setting, I think about teachers who, with best intentions, gave me a task, told me to do it, and I went for it. But especially being first in my family to go to college, when I had to do that, no one had really trained me to do it. So I was a little bit lost and I didn't have those skills. And over time, I've had to learn those. And it's hard if the first time you're learning how to really take on the world and think independently is when you're 18 versus starting that process earlier on and building that trust. And I'm thinking like flexible path and pace, having students trust, having like the teacher also become aware of themselves that they may not have set students up for success yet, and noticing, oh, right now my students, they're kind of all over the place. And instead of maybe saying like, they're so frustrating, why can't they get anything right? Or even, why can't I get anything right? Then taking a step back and saying, what can I do to set up some conditions that will set everyone up for success? Because I can't, for example, I can't do my independent like station working one-on-one with students if I keep getting interrupted. So what are some of the things here? What are the structures, routines that I need to help everyone? What kind of like, maybe we need to do an I do, we do, you do type. Maybe it needs to be a little bit slower. Maybe I got very excited, and because I believe in them so much, I've got very ambitious. Being able to have the awareness that within each of these things, students are both malleable, but they're also human and they are doing their best. And I really like to have this idea. And I think it goes along with nurturing learning environments, that everyone is trying their best in whatever capacity they have. For some kids, they're the caregivers of their family, and they may have stayed up late all night taking care of a baby because their parent was working, and then they come to your classroom exhausted. And the best that they can give you is being present. Whereas another student might just have other conditions where they stayed up until 11 p.m. because they had a sports game, and they come to your classroom feeling pretty tired, but because you've built that relationship with them, they feel cared for and they want to perform for you. But I think that adding this level of the awareness for teachers and students just makes these things work a little bit better, because then we can give each other some of this humanity and room for error, and ourselves room for error, because it's really hard to be so hard on yourself all the time. Speaking from personal experience and from having been a teacher, a coach, and in different roles, people, again, I like to think that they're doing the best they can with what they have at the time. So I think nurturing learning environments, it does live out in each of these core four, and it can actually give people permission to be not good at something, whether it's the teacher or the student.
Yeah, I feel like this has come full circle. The first thing that you talked about was creating like consistency and routines and how that feels for kids. And I think something important to name for all of these pieces is that they do need to be taught, right? You need to set up structures, you need to give students practice. You can't go in tomorrow and say, I'm going to do all these things in one lesson when we've never done them before, right? Because that is not a nurturing space for kids. They'll feel really overwhelmed. And as the teacher, that is overwhelming. So I love that call out of, you need to build the systems and structures. And even if you built them and it doesn't go great the first time, that's okay. You can step back and be like, I tried. This is what I would change. This is what I would do differently next time. And I'm saying that, and I'm saying that as someone who has a very hard time doing that. So I imagine there's some people on the end of this that are like, okay. The last thing that we wanted to talk about, Maryell, I'm going to pose this to you, but excited for this to just be the last piece of this conversation, is, we call this nurturing learning environments. And I have a feeling that there might be some folks who are feeling like, well, what if I'm not a natural nurturer? What does this look like for me?
I think this is an excellent question. I think there's this archetype of nurture, of the word nurture, that is someone who is very calm, very maybe loving. I don't know why, but I'm thinking Mrs. Potts from Beauty and the Beast. She just seems so nurturing. And that is one type of way to be nurturing. But I think what I think is really powerful is you can have whatever personality you have and still be nurturing, because there's these common elements, students feeling safe, students feeling like you are a consistent person in their life, that resonate throughout different personality types. And I was sharing with Katie that I think I hear this term of nurturing, and I love how now in the media we have people like Ted Lasso, if you watched that show, who are nurturing in their own way. But I think that, and who are like believe in people and want them to like want to build these strong cultures. Um, but there's also a lot of different ways. Like you said, Katie, sometimes kids are like, this person is so hard on us, but they really care. And that's actually a way that you're nurturing. So it's really finding what it means for you to be nurturing and really aligning that to your personality, because by showing up to things, kids might see you as someone who's nurturing because you're showing up for them in a way that maybe other teachers haven't. Or if in your classroom you're creating practices that help kids feel seen, that's all about feeling nurtured. And if you're thinking about your classroom and thinking like, this is not the type of person that I am, that's a really great practice in self-awareness, in thinking through, when I'm with kids, what do I do that helps them feel seen? And those are the ways that you're practicing being nurturing on a day-to-day basis that might not fit into this category or archetype. Any thoughts on that, Katie?
Yeah, and so much of what you said is resonating for me as someone who I think I had an idea of what it meant to be nurturing. I imagined like giving hugs pre-COVID. And, like all of these kind of, this is an interesting archetype, like very like motherly vibes of what it means to be a nurturer. But when I think about the people who pushed me or who I knew care about me deeply, none of them have those traits.
Yeah,
They are
exactly.
all, it was all really for me about high expectations and just feeling like someone knew about me as a person. So I think what you shared is really powerful as we talk about, if you don't think of yourself as a nurturer, maybe step back and think about, what is the archetype I have of a nurturer, right? And how can I maybe dispel that a little bit?
Yeah, and I Chrissy has such a great point that, much like learning style, kids may have different nurturing needs. And I love just getting out of the scope of this traditional view of nurturing, because yeah, they may need to be motivated, to be supported. And I love when kids like go to different people for different things, especially in high school, or even when I feel like when I was a classroom teacher of young students, I felt like a parent, because they saw me every day. I was like in their lives, tried to make connections with their own parents. I thought it was really great that they got something from their parents, and then for me, they got something else. And even for myself, the way that my brother it has special needs, and I grew up being like his second mom, and the way that I was nurturing and still am is that I'm a disciplinarian and I hold him accountable. And when we are together, he's like, oh no, because I have these high expectations of him, and I still do my best to be loving. But I do find it interesting that in my own life, my nurturing is like, all right, Victor, you can do this. Let's do it. Have you done this? Have you done that? And he really responds to those high expectations. So I love the way that people in the chat are thinking through these different nurturing needs, but also just the different ways we are nurturing and how it comes across in our, whether it's the ways that we're thinking about it in general or the ways that we actually act in real life.
Yeah. Hey, Chrissy, thanks for adding that. I see David agrees with you on that take. We know we're reaching at the end of our time together for this conversation, but would love to hear in the chat, what is resonating from you? Again, Maryell and I really wanted today to just be a space to talk, share our ideas and thoughts. And also we're wondering, as you're thinking about sharing this with your team, sharing the way that we talk about this, or just talking about this in general, what challenges do you anticipate, or what challenges have you experienced in talking about building this with the folks you work with, or with this with your students that are in your classroom? So we'll pause, add to the chat for one last time, and then we'll close out together.
And while people are typing, something I wanted to share and thought about is that the people in my life, whether they've been teachers, leaders in different areas, it seems like the people that were able to have both high expectations, but also gave me the opportunity to not always meet those and to help me be nicer to myself, were people who had taken the time to get to know themselves and to be able to have that kindness for me. Because I think when I think about people who maybe had high expectations, but stayed very stringent, they were pretty stressed out. And it was the people who kind of had worked on themselves, could regulate their emotions, that could understand if I didn't meet something, and then could support me in getting to that place. I think that also speaks to what we were talking about in terms of getting to know yourself, and in how that really can fuel your kindness and your patience for others.
Yeah, I agree. In the spirit of what you just said, and also make a plug for expert conversations that we have upcoming. So we are here, but we have 2 more conversations following this that will follow a similar format. And so wanted to just name that as Maryell and I were planning this, I am very much someone who was like, this is all of the things people need to know. And she was like, well, I think this is supposed to be a conversation. And so this was a very different vibe that I am used to putting out. And so was excited to learn from her in how to approach work, of like, learning doesn't have to be always giving people all of the ideas. It can be talking and hearing from others about what they've done. So this was exciting for me. As we speak about nurturing learning environments, it was a little bit of a self-awareness and a moment of growth for me to be a part of this conversation in a different format that I'm used to operating in. And I love all of the feedback that we got in the chat. It was wonderful connecting with you all today. And so, David, what you're speaking about is something that we are working on as well. Changing the way that we view what nurturing is. Some think it's all lovey-dovey. I think that is probably a direct quote I've heard before, but naming, you don't have to be, whatever we think of an archetype of a natural nurturer is to be nurturing. Maryell, what are you thinking about as we close out?
I think I've been so grateful for all the ways people have participated, both in terms of starting off the conversation. I was like, oh man, look at all these amazing teachers who've touched lives and are now, and the educators currently in the space that are carrying those stories, and also carrying that love that they felt from their teachers and are now giving it to their own students. So I think that's been really powerful. And then just hearing the ways that this is already going on. And I think that as a teacher, I was doing a lot of these practices almost before they were cool, and it felt a little lonely. I felt like, okay, this isn't something that is like part of a rubric, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think it's important. And so definitely want to acknowledge those that are doing it. You're doing great. This is awesome. And I think oftentimes this is like the secret sauce, like building relationships, doing these things that will help your students learn. Because I know as a coach and just as a person, you can have the most beautiful lesson plan, but if you don't have those relationships with kids, it might not stick with them. And so thank you all. Nary, I love what you're saying too about this nurturing as a key to emotional wellness in students, and that it really does help educators feel better too. And there are a lot of different practices. If you all are interested, feel free to follow up with us in terms of whether it's learning about your own emotional intelligence through books. I've also done like courses. I like to look up like self-care for educators. That can be really helpful too, to just as a starting point. And love that. Yes, you teach students, not subject matter. So thank you all for your participation in the chat. That's what we want. We want to talk to the people, and like Katie said, sad we can't see your faces, but so appreciate you being engaged and invested in this and in the ways that you all show up with your students. That's just very humbling.
Yeah, thank you all. I think that's a wrap. 2 minutes back in your day. Again, we're excited to get to connect with you, hopefully again in the future. So thank you all. Thanks for pushing me, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.